Disclaimer. The information and education material contained herein is meant to promote the general understanding and dialogue of GAN's processing. Such information is not meant or intended to serve as a substitute for a healthcare professional's clinical training, experience, or judgment. For patients and individuals, such information is not to be a substitute for professional medical, therapeutic, or healthcare advice or counseling. For medical issues or concerns, including decisions about medications and other treatments, readers, viewers, listeners should always consult their physician or, in serious cases, seek immediate assistance from emergency personnel. Prescription information, procedures, and use of medical devices information should be undertaken only by properly trained and certified medical personnel. We specifically disclaim any warranties, express or implied, including implied warranties of merchantability or fitness for a particular purpose. Such information is provided, as is, and is believed to be accurate at the time of its publishing, but it is the viewer's job to evaluate the accuracy of any information found in this presentation. Every case presented is of their own experience, applied by themselves for themselves, and it applies to their case only. Every person experiencing health problems should seek professional medical advice and consult their course of treatment with a doctor. The processes of plasma balancing described herein are a natural process which supports the body but does not replace medical advice or therapies one is already subject to.
And thank you very much, everybody, for being here today. Nothing much happened this week in the KAKT Foundation, so we'll have to figure out what we can talk about.
You're ready to pack up the tents already?
Well, you know, we just have to find out something to talk about because you know, nothing much has happened. The fact of the matter is, this meeting is very important because it follows up the Knowledge Seekers Workshop, and then it follows up the Brazilian workshop. And so I want to thank everybody for making this happen and contributing to this and understanding how much there is to be done, how much we have done and how much there is to be done. And so please fasten your seatbelt and get on this trip and get in and enjoy it. And that's an order. This is the KAKT Foundation Spaceship Institute teachings on plasma science. We're discussing intermediate transmission, and this session is called Containment. My name is Alexander. I am from Canada. It is February 11th of 2024, and this is the KAKT Foundation North America Plasma Education Series. And so what we're trying to do, and please, let's make sure we all have this in focus, because many of us have spent thousands of hours learning. You have to understand that many of us have spent thousands of hours teaching also. And so do we have that time? And can we wait for everybody to catch up? And so the answer is no. So somehow, some way, we have to distill the information, not only down because of the time aspect of it, but not everyone is a researcher. Not everyone is a scientist. And everyone needs to understand this, because the number one question is the meaning of life. And if you go through life and you don't know the meaning of life, that truly is a sad condition. And so we are here to try and assist that, not only for ourselves, but mainly for others. In the process of doing it for others, doing it for ourselves is a given. And so we're talking about containment as a follow-up to understanding the y-axis dimension, cycles, and frequency. And so what do we talk about containment? Is that like a shoebox or something? And so we're trying to eliminate this donkey hesitancy, because we know it's very comfortable, because it's the lowest energy state. But as we walk along, we find that rolling is faster, and jumping and flipping is also possible. But we find that life is very hard until, you know, we actually get up on that horse, because the horse walking is faster than the man walking. So whether we walk step by step, or the horse walks step by step, always step by the cycles. We have to ask ourselves how many steps and how many cycles. So therefore, we need some kind of reference. But all in all, when you look at the big picture, we want to be free. And so the number one thing is to release ourselves and let ourselves go. Well, where are you going? So we try and analyze the books of Marin Tavakoli-Kesh, as in book number 1, the universal order of the creation. It is also the universal order of matter. So we put the two together and we have the creation of matter. And so that would be book number 1. And it's always been strange that it would be book number 1, because book number 2 is the structure of light. So that means it has to come from somewhere and go somewhere, and there has to be a connection. So somehow that information has to be transmitted. And that's why we're talking about transmission. And then, of course, there's book number 3, the origin of the universe. Why is that not book number 1? So we are conducting transmutation preparation sessions now. We're in the second month of a 6-month program. And so this coming Friday, we will have the second session. And there has been a change. There has been a very significant change, you see, because these systems have been turned on December the 2nd. These systems have been modified 2 weeks ago. These systems were turned on last week. And these systems are amazing. We are on the road to one nation, one planet, and one race for justice and world peace. We've been doing this for 312 weeks in a row with your host, Rick Friend, and the Universal Council. And it's very difficult because we're not recognized. But when you look at the United Nations, which is recognized, and you see how impotent they are, it's so sad. I, for one, grew up with an immense amount of respect for that agency. But we're all searching for outer space. So we're frequently pushing pedals to get to that plasma highway, to that pie in the sky and beyond. Well, wait a second. We're not even on the highway. We're not in the sky. And then there's a beyond? Wait a second. So when we look at the structure of the plasma highway and we say, well, how do we get there? Well, look at the map. We're still on the transmission highway. We never really understood it. And it's hard to talk about something that is new because you always want to relate to something that you know. Well, what do we know? Well, we know about transmission. We can talk, we can hear, we can play the radio, we have TVs, we have cell phones, we have computers, and we can do transmission, but of a certain kind. So when we look at the universe embodiment, we ran into some problems here because they say the speed of light is the fastest transmission. Is that true? And of course, we want to measure it, but there's a problem because also the faster you go, the bigger you get. Because if the universal embodiment is the entire universe, and that is the fastest transmission, then in order for you to measure, you have to measure the entire universe. And is that true? And the question then is, what is beyond? But the more important question is, why didn't we ask that before? And maybe we could ask is, why don't we have that answer? Should we know the creation of the universe or how the universe is created? We know that it exists from energy. So energy is always positive, isn't it? So, but energy has a charge because it's always in motion. The charge reflects the motion. And if it's moving, then all things have to be in combination, right? To go from here to there. But when we look at book number 1, wait a second, we're creating matters. So when we look at the cover of book number 1, and we see the combination of the matter, dark matter, and antimatter, and we say that that is a construct of a maggraph, we could say that that is a construct of a containment. And then if the energy is always in motion, then it has to go somewhere. So wouldn't it make sense that if you're going from one containment, and if you're going somewhere, that you would want to go to another containment? Where? Why? How do you connect? So basically, we were given a kindergarten experiment. And thanks to the pandemic, the dividend was the cups of life. And remember, they weren't called the cups of pandemic. They were reflective of the inner space emotional strength that came from your core and manifested Ganses. And we had physical Ganses and emotional Ganses, soul Ganses and earthbound Ganses and all sorts of things. And some of us made more than others. So there were factors that affected the rate, affected the quantity, affected the success. And so this all became part of the radiance manifestation of the person from the emotional strength within. But we were able to create multiple Ganses: carbon dioxide Gans, calcium, copper, zinc Gans, water Gans, amino acid Gans. And we did this from inside cups that never had any Gans. Well, where did that come from? Because in essence, those Ganses were transmitted. And so how did they get there? Well, when you look at the Earth and you see the periodic table of elements, and this is only a small selection, how did these elements get here? We just accept that they're here. We accept that they are part of the Earth, and we don't know how it got here. So as we try and figure this out, we had to learn some terminology. So the transmission was saw as part of the x-axis rotation, and the transition we saw as part of the y-axis polarity. But we're discussing the transmission dimension. And in that dimension, we have to have an x-axis and a transmission. And in order to facilitate this transmission, we have to have a y-axis. And so now we have this dimension of transmission with both an x-axis and a y-axis. So we see that two forces come together, and this was the basic teaching. So if these two forces come together and they create this x-axis dimension and this y-axis dimension and this positive energy containment, did we not forget a question here? These forces that came together to a containment. The containment became after the two forces came together. It's the coming together of the two forces that create the containment. So we have a field capture, which includes the x-axis transmission, which is parallel to the ground, and the y-axis transmission, which is perpendicular to the ground, right? The ground is our reference point. That's how we know if we're on the x-axis or the y-axis. But what is the difference in the position? And so we discussed that last week. And so we found that there's a magnetical positioning that comes as a result of the energy that comes from the gravitational component of the sun and interacts with the gravitational component of the earth. And so the magnetical positioning comes as a result of the interaction of those two. And of course, the first element in the periodic table of elements was the hydrogen spectrum. And we call it a spectrum because it's like a fingerprint. And we can see that. But when I say we can see that, we can see the colors. And the colors are unique to that hydrogen. And all the colors are shown, some more than others. But there's a unique quality to the hydrogen. That's why we call it the fingerprint. So the thing about these concrete poles that we were talking about before, we would make them in a cement mixer. And that cement mixer was a container. And then we would put it in forms. So these forms would contain the shape. And then we would rotate these forms. And lo and behold, there was a hole in the pole. So the poles were created in the form. And that was the containment. But what contains the hole in the pole? And what about bamboo poles? These are the forms that the vertical people have. And so the same problem exists. What contains the hole in the pole? Well, forget that. What contains the pole itself? Because there's no cement mixer and there's no form. And yet we have a pole. And what about the sun space? That is a field. We are in that field. And in that field is a planet space. Our planet is called Earth. There are other planets. And each of these planets has their own space. And they're all part of the sun space. And then, of course, there's a moon space. We have one moon. And then there's that space in between these spaces. So these are all fields. And they're all overlapping. And they are all unique. They're all specific. They all have boundaries. They're all contained. Where's the form? Where is the form? Where is the cement mixer? What contains the fields? So previously we tried to settle some anomalies in, how do we roll along? Because we were walking or getting on a horse. Now we can roll along. And it's still x-axis transmission, but our wheel is perpendicular to the ground. And so we found that one rotation is one cycle. And as we rotate, we can actually move on the ground. So we had to resolve this anomaly, however, because there was no reason for it to roll. And so we find that there is an input rotation that's perpendicular to the motion. So the motion is forward, so there's an axle that is connected to that. And the output motion is aligned with that rotation. So if you want to be part of this transmission along the x-axis dimension, would you get in the car, please? Because the car is the containment for your body. So get in the car, fasten your seatbelt, and you know what? We're going to roll along. But there's a difference in the position. And we don't question that. We don't understand that. But the thing is that as we roll along, we have cycles. And as we measure these cycles by time and distance, that affects our speed. And so it doesn't affect whether or not we get to the destination, but it does affect the rate. So we've resolved this anomaly by introducing frequency and cycles. So we have these cycle relationships, you see. So we look at the x-axis dimension, that's the circumference, and the y-axis dimension, that's the diameter. But the problem, you see, whether it's a cycle of the pedaling or whether it's the cycle of the wheels, and whether it's a small wheel or a big wheel, the cycle relationship is always constant. It always is relative to pi. How can something be different when something is always constant? We constantly ask ourselves that question, don't we? Sometimes we see the more things change, the more they stay the same. So how does energy move? Now we find that energy can be flowing or binding. So since energy is always positive, it's the motion that is negative or positive. So we find that the negative gives and the positive takes. So which is it? Is it giving or is it taking? So now we understand that it all depends on your point of view. And not only that, but as we've referenced Herman Whale, we find that this matter that we're talking about occupies a definite part of space at a definite moment of time. But there's no such thing as one and the same energy. And this energy constitutes a charge at two adjacent increments of time. In other words, a mother may have twins. And you say, well, they're alike. But they're actually not 100% alike because one twin is born prior to the other one. And that difference is a different increment of time. And so there's no such thing as one and the same energy, because the manifestation of that twin is the embodiment of the energy. And that embodiment follows the principles of flow and connection. So we now have a different kind of containment. The original containment was in the womb. And now we have a containment within the body. And then we talk about just regular transmission. When we talk about rolling and sliding, but then there's also spinning. Our Earth is spinning, but we're not spinning, are we? And so we're trying to figure out what's the difference in position, because we're here in our teeny tiny perfect world, and then there's this big universe that's out there, and we can see it because, you see, we can see the colors. But these colors have a relationship between wavelength and frequency. But the speed of light is constant. How can you have different colors if the speed of light is constant? So if the speed of light is constant, that means it's constant in every color. And because it's constant in every color, we find that there is a relationship where if the wavelength increases, the frequency decreases. And if the frequency increases, the wavelength decreases. And so we can tell what color it is by the relationship of the wavelength and the frequency. And that's how we get the fingerprint of the hydrogen spectrum, because it reflects all the colors that it is to us and is unique. It's a fingerprint. But when we look at the rainbow, we see the colors. But there's an area beyond where we don't see any colors at all. And there's an area within where we don't see any color at all. These areas are beyond. This speed of light is constant. And so there's a rule. It's based on Planck's constant. Planck was a scientist. And that constant is symbolized as h, small h. And this is a fundamental universal constant. It defines the quantum nature of energy and relates the energy of a photon to its frequency. We have an international system of units. And the constant value is based on joule hertz or joule seconds. So the dimension of Planck's constant is the product of energy multiplied by time. And this is a quantity called action. Kind of strange to have action where things are constant. But it's often defined, therefore, as the elementary quantum of action. And its value is in meter per kilogram per second units. So there's a relationship. So everything in our universe is based on this constant, or so they say. Because when we're looking at this relationship between the dimensional effects of the y-axis and the dimensional effects of the x-axis, which takes into account the transmission of the x-axis and the y-axis, then we have to determine the distance of that transmission. And so arbitrarily, we base it on the length of the foot. Whose foot? And then we find that the length of the foot is not constant. The foot is contained within the body. And the body is the containment for the soul. So the body is not constant. The foot is not constant. The containment is constant. And so we have an x-axis dimension we call length and a y-axis dimension we call height. And I think a carpenter would have difficulty building a house on those two dimensions. But as scientists, we can graph these dimensions. So we find that on the x-axis, we have a motion, cycles, but we also have a y-axis dimension where we have a positive motion and a negative motion, which comes back to a positive motion, which completes a cycle. And in the process, it creates motion. So when we look at the two dimensions and apply it to the flat Earth cycles, we wonder if we painted ourselves into a corner. We're stuck in this X dimension and Y-axis dimension. Maybe we're boxed in, or maybe we're in a container. Well, what if we were to graph these dimensions? Well, I guess that's okay if your point of view is from the top. But what if your point of view is from the side? So we see that the x-axis is the transmission. And with the y-axis, well, we have mountains and we have valleys and we have water. And if you were to step off the edge of the flat Earth and grab onto something and hang on for, as they say, dear life, I think if you were hanging on to a cliff, you could hang on. But what if that cliff was water? Could you hang on to a cliff of water? And so I think it's understandable that you can have a cliff and it would be solid. So that cliff could kind of extend above the flat line, and the valley can extend below the flat line. But what contains the water? I usually put it in a cup or a pail. But, you know, if we have a flat Earth, you need a pretty big cup or pail. And then, of course, you take one more step and you go beyond. Where exactly is beyond? And is it above or is it below? We keep asking these questions because we're always looking for a stairway to heaven. But we've been looking at it the wrong way. The stairway to heaven is within. We are more stable because we're more complex. And if we were simple, we would be more unstable. And so there's a movement that goes back and forth, and it's affecting us. So as we move from complex to simple or back, we move from stable to unstable. So the change is constant. But the susceptibility is not. And then what happens if you go one step beyond? So a lot of us don't want to go one step beyond. We want to be contained within our own physicality. And we understand that this is a binding energy force. And it's important for us to have this energy binding force because that's how we manifest our physicality. And so please excuse us for being self-serving. And of course, my neighbor has the same concern. He's concerned with energy binding, and he's concerned in a self-serving manner. If I suddenly decide to supplement my energy binding by stealing energy from my neighbor, which is self-serving, but it's at the expense of my neighbor, what is my neighbor to do? Because the desire to have this energy binding, which is dominated by his self-serving requirements, is now being depleted. So he has to supplement that energy. And if he's losing it to me, either he wants to get it back, or, we can do it at the expense of someone else. Why not? Which is easier? Which consumes less energy? And so we find we have a society that's adopted energy binding at the expense of others. And we do this as a rule, forgetting, of course, that we were born. Forgetting, of course, that it's a two-way transmission. It's a two-way street. We see we have two directions, two sizes, two variables, two dimensions. But then we have another transmission anomaly. And so we try to see the relationship between frequency, time, and cycles. And we find that that equals time. And when frequency has a relationship with wavelength, that equals distance. So time and distance is the difference in position. That's how we get from position 1 to position 1A. Making sure that you're inside that containment vehicle and your seatbelt is on. And then, of course, while we're doing it, the Earth is rotating on its x-axis and rotating around its y-axis poles. And they say it's rotating very quickly, but yet somehow you don't need a seatbelt because we are attached firmly to the ground. So we find that the Earth has this binding energy transmission. And this energy transmission is facilitated by attraction. And in the net result is absorption, where the energy comes in and then more energy comes in. And we can see that the Earth is very gravitationally stable. So if we look at this anomaly and how we get from one position to another position, we find that as we move along, because the car in position 1 and the car in position 1A are in two different positions. We have to absorb energy to facilitate the cycle. And the more energy we absorb into these cycles, the higher the frequency. So we can alter the time and the distance, and we can affect our position. But in order to bring the energy in, we have to maintain a balanced position. And the Earth does this. It elevates its energy transmission so that energy is emitted through the action of repulsion. Out it goes, and more goes out. And as a result, there's a magnetical stability. And we know it's stable because the sun does this all the time, and the Earth does this all the time. And both are very, very reliable. So in order to be able to continue moving along, we have to have this emission as well. So we have absorption, and we have emission, and then we have more absorption. And as a result, we have this difference in position. And all along, we have been contained in this vehicle. And this is a good thing. It allows us to get there. But we have our own vehicle, the body. And so we find that our body is not very dependable. We have too many variables. At present, we have over 8 billion variables on our Earth space. So the Earth space embodiment is the common denominator. It's much more dependable. And so the Earth space is like a maggrav. And it has these cycles, so they're maggrav dependent. And then, of course, the frequency of these cycles are also maggrav dependent. And we're on this Earth space, and sometimes we're in a car, sometimes we're just walking. So we have our own embodiment. We have our own containment. And that container is overlapping the maggrav container of the Earth space. So we have a containment within a containment, and the containment is maggrav dependent. So when we're looking at a field release, the first thing we had to have was this Gans binding, right? So it's this energy, this excess energy that is input. And if we add rotation to that, and then create a field where we have an extreme offsetting of this input energy, and therefore we can create this plasmatic stability, then we all become fans of humanity, because we're releasing energy that is representative of our humanity. And our humanity is bound by the ethos of the universe. And so this transmission that we keep talking about is the release of these binding energies. And they precede the retrieval of beneficial energy. In other words, the field release precedes the field capture. The giving precedes the taking. The emission precedes the absorption. So being plasma dominant has to precede the physical dominant. And this is where the problem lies. So when we're talking about being dimension-centric, we know that man-space is not man-space-centric. We need something more reliable. So it's probably our dimension is Earth space-centric. But the Earth space is part of the sun space, so is the sun space dimension the center. And that's not really conclusive at this point in time. But since the sun space overlaps the earth space, which overlaps the man space, which overlaps the in-between space, each of which is a containment. And each of those is part of our dimension. And each of those are part of this constant universe. Then this containment is what's dimension-centric. Do you want to ask the question? What's beyond? So in understanding the matter plasma dimension, we have to understand the key difference between the physicality and the plasmatic reality. So one is feeding and one is the feedback, and man is feedback dominant. And therein lies the problem. So if you can't explain what you don't know, explain what you do know. Understand that in order for something to be released from a field, that field has to have a containment. And so we find that maybe a one-track mental binding is a binding to a containment. And it facilitates that containment through excessive emotional input. But in order to release, it has to have an extreme offsetting output. These are part of the field release cycles. And they have to go from a containment. So the containment releases an idea, a wish, courage, and love. Is that a containment? Or is that a PM tick? And is that a PM tick? Or is that a containment? We now have choices. We're in the post-November the 11th, 2023 era, where we are starting to understand outer space, this transmutation space, and how we can spring forward from this bountiful space we call Earth space. As long as we can understand that graceful space we call the inner space, our inner space, the greater oneness that we've been trying for 524 Thursdays in a row in the Knowledge Seekers workshops to transcend the limitations of nuclear science, which understands that the speed of light is constant. Join us at this very, very special moment in time, and please all date stamp in your memories where you were this week, this very uneventful week, which marks the launch of the first cache space plasma research team effort in China, Iran, and the United States. This is the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute, Teachings of Plasma Science, welcoming all the beautiful knowledge seekers and researchers. The World Peace Treaty needs to be signed, and it needs to be signed emphatically, with emotion, with feeling, and with sincerity. Choose your weapon. It could be a pen, it could be your soul, it could be your heart, but it has to be sincere. And we wonder if man is cornered in a two-dimensional universe. And can man find heaven through the field transmission of vertical motion with the guidance of forward motion and perpendicular rotation? But one thing is constant. We are constantly searching for the heartbeat frequency of truth. And the containment within a dimension is foundational for transmission. Plasma science needs to continue to be delivered daily in exchange for peace on Earth. So welcome to the new outer space age. You can under your seatbelts now. Thanks for joining me on this trip.
Thank you, Alex, very much. Let's see if any of our participants would like to raise an issue, a question, make a comment. See if there's any other things they'd like to share. It doesn't have to be exactly on your teaching. Maybe you've had a question in the back of your mind that you wanted to bring forward. I think Alex is well suited to answer it or try and answer it. Again, there's probably many ways to get to Rome, isn't there, Alex? There's not just one road.
Oh, definitely. We're only discussing one road. It's important to understand that, because that's how you can understand that there are, as you say, many roads.
When you talk about x-axis, y-axis, spinning, rotation, when we do a transmutation, will we become dizzy, almost like when you get off the, what do they call that, where all the horses, carousel?
Oh, merry-go-round.
Yeah, like a merry-go-round. Will, you know, when you get off sometimes, depending on how fast it was spinning, you kind of have to stand there and let the energies dissipate. Do you think there'll be any sort of dizziness? Are we going to actually spin, rotate, or do any of that? Just thought I'd get your take.
No, not in that way, but dizziness, yes, for sure, because we will be losing our gravitational stability. There will be a shift, you see, because our overall dependence is on our earthbound state. So the way we move in our earthbound situation is exclusively physical, or so we acknowledge. But with so little understanding of what we do for roughly 1/3 of our life, which is to sleep, and now we know that the soul is kind of gratified that we go to sleep because we're such a burden on our soul. So the soul is free to go and do whatever. So the soul can travel, and the soul doesn't need to sleep. So the problem, of course, is the body. It can't travel the way the soul travels, and it doesn't have the energy, so it needs to sleep. So every night we say to the soul, oh yeah, you really want to go out there? Some people might say gallivanting, but that's a word with different connotations. But nevertheless, the body is saying, oh man, I'm so tired. I need my rest. You go and have a good time and see you in the morning. And we accept that. We don't question it. But now we have a different proposition. And this becomes very, very important because it's life altering. And since we have accepted all this during the course of our life, we become very stable. So by changing this radically, and it is a radical change, it becomes very unsettling, unstable, destabilizing. Did I tell you the story when I was being introduced to this subject and I was sitting in my bed and I was thinking about it and I fell out of bed? Like, how do you fall out of bed? If you're standing on your bed, or you know, if you're sitting on your bed, well, maybe you lose your balance and you fall down, but I was flat in bed. How do you fall off the flat earth? But I did, because it was very destabilizing. But once I could see the difference, then I became aware. And didn't understand, I just became aware. And at that point, the doors started to open up. And so once you're aware, and as you see things happen in your life, and you say, well, I had a stable set of references that explained life to me up until now. Now I have a new set of references. How is that different? And you will find that you won't have this problem of dizziness. This dizziness is extreme in the beginning. It's the difference between being outside of the containment of a car and being inside the containment of the car. And if you've, lived under a rock for 100 years and all of a sudden someone says to you, well, you want to take a ride in my car? And you say, well, I don't even know what a car is. Oh, here, come on in. Well, I think you'd be going through some anxiety. And of course, the driver, just to be playful, would floor it. Burn rubber, cause a lot of noise, swerve a little bit just to see you sweat for fun. Life is fun. So
Okay, anyone want to bring up a topic, a subject, a question? Ask for clarification on an answer? Let me see if I can sync the Canadian ship with this one, Alex.
that is so easy. Well, what's okay? Fire
Okay,
away.
so you talk about giving before you receive, or giving in order to receive, or when we talk about the neutron, and we talk about the decay or the splitting into electron proton, if that's actually what happens, or the energies, is that neutron giving and taking all the time? Maybe, like you say, PM ticks, plasmatic magnetic fields, but keeping a little bit more than it's giving until the point where the energy builds up and then it can't contain it, and then it divides into the electron and the proton? Or is it constantly taking until it gets to that point of energy? I would think it's going back and forth, but it could also be that it continually takes, maybe only releases a little bit of it until it reaches that point where it cannot hold that energy and then it decays. So isn't this an example of taking first before giving?
So this is a really excellent question, because the first point I'd like to make is the giving and the taking has to come to a containment, and the neutron is the containment. So from that, you can give and take. But in order to create the neutron, obviously there has to be some taking, right? The coming together of the two PM ticks, shall we say. So it isn't until that point that we have a containment. So that is the beginning of the containment. But it gets stronger. It becomes more gravitational, right? So that containment is constant. But we can change that containment by bringing more and more energy in. And it can maintain that containment within a range. And we know that that range can move, because when we see that hydrogen spectrum, it has colors, and each of those colors is contributing to the containment. And in order to maintain those colors, there's a waffling between the frequency and the wavelength. And so that waffling, to be able to happen, has to have a range within the containment. Because if that containment was rigid and it didn't allow for any waffling, then there would be no change in the wavelength nor the frequency. So we have the capability of changing the nature of the containment within a dimension. Now, once we get to the edge, then there's an area that's beyond. So the question then is the beyond part of that containment? And of course, it can't possibly be. What is it? So in some cases, one containment, as shown by book number 3, The Origin of the Universe, it can split up into 2 containments. Does it necessarily mean the demise of the original? So the question is, does it necessarily mean the demise of the original?
No, we see the original universe there, correct? Splitting off
Correct.
into a larger and smaller one. Yeah, I don't think the neutron goes away. It just splits into and does create a bigger container, I think.
Well,
because now you have those energies outside of it, and it's again, I'm not really clear on all of this, but I just thought it would be a question to ask. Is it taking before it gives, or is it taking more than it gives?
it
would seem it has to.
It
if
has
it's
to,
going to
yes.
split.
Well, when the two forces come together in order to create that containment, so the question then is, are the PM ticks a containment? You know, how do the PM ticks maintain their containment if that containment is looking to combine with something else? So once they combine into a containment, that containment constitutes the dimension. So now you have this dimension, and inside the dimension, you have this constant energy to maintain its mag-grav position. So now you really open up a kettle of worms here, because if we go outside of that containment, based on what you just asked, the answer could be that we exceed that containment. And
it would be an expanded sphere in a way. It's a bigger,
yes.
It's still connected to the original, but now the environment has become bigger.
Well,
for both.
Just saying that it may not necessarily dissolve, but if it were to dissolve, then the embodiment of that original containment would be transferred to another containment. But as we've seen, we also in that process create PM ticks. And so
definitely plasmas, PM ticks, yep.
Right. So these PM ticks are not part of that containment, are they?
I think they are. I think they're in the environment. They're looking to balance out. But again, I've never really observed it. Maybe that's one of the things we can do in the future is observe some of these things and get a better understanding. Are you subscribing to the notion that the plasma has a frequency? I would think that would be more matter state. It doesn't really have, the frequency would be a dimension in a way, but the plasma doesn't have any of those barriers. And of course, we know some of the energies, he said, convert through a frequency that come in from the universe and convert into energies in the matter state. And he mentioned frequency in that sort of wording, I think. But to me, I know that was a question we went back and forth with in some of the classes. Does it have a frequency? It does have a frequency. It doesn't have a frequency. I would think if it had a frequency, that means it would be limited, or the matter state could interfere with it in a way. But without a
Okay.
frequency, it can go anywhere, penetrate anything, because there's no frequency involved.
So congratulations, you've answered your own question and you've done it masterfully. So what I am trying to demonstrate is where the frequency and the cycles apply. Because we are matter state bound, physically bound. We are physically dominant. And that is a limiting thing. And then if we see that that limiting thing keeps us in a constant state, then that constancy is limiting. And have we ever challenged that limitation? It's time to challenge that limitation. We have enough proof to prove that that limitation, as we understand it, is false.
Well, I know you haven't stumped all the participants, that's for sure. Let's ask again if they'd like to raise a question or make a comment. Otherwise, you're going to have to water this down even further, Alex. Maybe,
Oh, no.
maybe
We
bring in a big spoon and we'll be spoon fed.
No, the challenge that we're all facing here is that, you know, we maybe represent about 14% of the population. We need to get to the rest. And the rest is like clueless. So this is where the problem lies. And how do we do that? How do we become more efficient? So, you know, as I say, we're not all scientists, nor are we researchers. And there are those who want to be that. And then we need teachers as well. But do we need to, you know, wear a uniform, a teacher's uniform? We don't. We can, as normal human beings, be teachers, and we don't even have to be in a classroom. And we know that. And especially today, and I'm talking specifically about Canada, the school system has collapsed. We are bringing up a generation of know-nothings. And this all started in the year of my graduation from high school, where we transferred the funding of the schools from the number of students who graduated to the number of students who attended. So therefore, the funding of the school was based on the attendance at the beginning of the day. And that was what they submitted to the Board of Education to achieve the funding.
They always
No,
have an angle on these things, don't they?
Well, if you missed class, you suffered severe penalties. Do you recall that?
Yeah, I didn't miss too many classes. I wasn't a big class skipper.
No, but there were people in your class who did.
Oh, yeah.
And they received penalties.
Usually, I think they had truant officers and other people
Yeah.
who would go
Oh,
scour
yeah.
the city and see if you were in the playground or the park or
Oh, you
where
mean
you've been
come
going.
home and knock on your door and ask your parents, where is little Jenny? Huh? Okay, that job has disappeared. You know, you talk about, you know, this what do you call it? Dissolving, dilution, their theory. Truant officers have been diluted. Okay, so there's no incentive at 1 minute after the hour to stay in school. You just kind of walk out of class and you do whatever you want. Okay, and you know they only ask you to achieve 50% on your exams to pass, but you know you have to attend some classes. You know, maybe read a book. I don't know, but you know the education system has changed. I mean, I ran into the situation this week, and you know, I'm getting firsthand knowledge, and I don't know how to say this, but there are cat litter boxes in the classrooms for the benefit of those who um, relate to cats.
Or koalas. You remember Quickie Koala, don't you?
Yeah, but I mean,
Yeah, I know. The other point is, Alex, though, I think some of the children are quite bored with what they're hearing. And of course, it's sort of, they say, we're out of here. This is just too dulling, too boring. It's not for me. So they take off or they go on recess and don't come back.
yeah, but the problem is that they have now, the whole purpose of education, which has been, conveyed to us, has been, to get a good job and be fine, upstanding citizens and contribute to society and all that. Well, that has been totally subverted. So, there is no there's a disconnect there, between school and what you do with citizenship. So it becomes almost like a prison sentence. So, well, how long do you have to go to school? Well, I'll go to school for 4 years in high school, and then once it's over, I'm out of here. And a lot of them, will say, well, wait a second, I do want to have some academic achievement, so I'd like to go to university. And then you find, oh my God, you're not qualified for university because you don't know anything, and you've gone from a school system which you don't have to pay for, and to go into a university system where you have to pay. And so you look at the student loans and what a burden that is to the vast number of students in the American population. It's a huge burden, and the amount of money is well, it's astronomical as far as I'm concerned. I mean, I'm hearing of correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm hearing of six-digit student loans. It's that's is that true?
I don't know. I really don't know.
Well, it's amazing. I know here in Canada, it would cost. I'm going back 10 years. It would cost at least $40,000 for a university education. Well, for many of us, that's uh, a year's salary. But there are people who are making, three times that. So it's not a problem, but it is a problem because the more you make, the more taxes you pay. So actually, the net income, uh, in terms of spending money, gets severely diluted as well. So you end up being on a treadmill, and you say, well, I don't have time to talk about two forces coming together. I've got to pay my rent, and I've got to keep up with the Joneses, and I can't drive to school in a beater, or drive to the office in a beater. I have to, buy a fancy car, or at worst case, I guess I can lease one. But appearances are very, very important. And then as soon as you say appearances, you're talking about superficiality. So this world has uh, built up a foundation on superficiality. And in the plasma science, we're not talking about that. This is why the plasma dimension precedes the physical dimension. And this is what we're trying to demonstrate. And the only way that we can demonstrate is on the basis of something that we do know. And what we do know is our physicality. And so, okay, well, here's our physicality. But when we look at it, we just kind of accept it. So when I was a kid, they said, oh, speed of light is the fastest speed. Well, when I found out that that was not true, I fell out of bed. It's shocking. It's destabilizing. My whole worldview was turned upside down. And so when you're turned upside down, you say, well, wait a second, I walk on the ground, now I'm walking on the ceiling, and am I upside down, or am I looking the wrong way? What's going on? And then suddenly, you feel the earth rotating, and you say, hey, yes, the earth is rotating and I'm on it. And then what? What's beyond? And you start asking these questions, and you say, well, who can I ask? Well, you can ask mommy or daddy, but guaranteed they have the same problem. So we have no precedence. We have to look for some kind of gravitational stability to feed off of. And now we can understand how important this containment is, because that's the stabilizing effect. And from that containment, we can give and take. And now we were coming to understanding certain things. Fundamentally, you were a baby. Now you're an adult. You are still within your containment. So the direct answer to your first question, can you take more energy than you give off? There's your proof. Yes, you can. And you can stay within your containment.
So are the cosmic rays an exception to the rule? Do they need a containment? It seems a few workshops ago, you can't have a plasma without a container, and then later on, he's saying we don't need a container anymore.
Well, I think you've touched on a very sensitive issue, that the cosmic rays are functioning different from the containment that we understand. That's where the problem lies. The containment that we understand is that two forces coming together create this containment. We don't understand the containment of the two forces.
Now, I'm just looking through this workshop, the transcript there about there's a big difference between the cosmic rays and the plasmatic or plasmatic cosmic rays. I'm just going to scroll through here, see if I can find that. Maybe we can just open that up for a minute.
And then take over the screen too. Once you found that, take over the screen and
Okay.
show it to
We'll try to
the
bring
team.
it into a context.
Well, you're doing terrific.
Okay.
Oh.
I'm just looking for it, so just let me concentrate on this for a moment.
So all of us are, facing this dilemma, because we need to convey this information, or first of all, we need to assimilate this information ourselves, right? So that we can stabilize ourselves. Then we have to incorporate that in our thinking and apply terminology to it so that we can convey this information to someone else. You had alluded earlier on, how Dr. Cadwell has, introduced many new words. I've introduced a new word, plasmagen and mattergen. And I thought carbogen was a new word, but I think the carbogen is an old word, but I think I introduced a new meaning to it. So we need that so that we can actually communicate with our friends and associates, and not bore them and scare them away, but actually make sense. So you've got the screen. Very good, Mark. Take over.
Okay, and this is very, very feasible in the next maybe 3 to 5 years. They were talking about the systems. We need collaboration in production of radiation in cosmic rays, which are different than cosmic rays. Anyone want to try to open that up? And that knowledge is not being shared. Well, I hope I didn't scare you off by that. But he's already saying we haven't shared that knowledge. Once we share the knowledge with the cosmic radiation, which is a lot of knowledge still needs to be learned, then you go through it, then you'll see the changes. So we definitely have a delineation between the production of radiation and cosmic rays, which are different than cosmic rays. Anyone want to take a swipe at that?
While people are thinking about that, I'd just like to take a swipe at it myself here, because the way the technology has been taught, and especially if we go back several years to the Blueprint series, what we tried to do was to apply the plasma principles to the physicality, to understand that the physical manifestation follows the rules of plasmatic manifestation. So that's a fact. However, the nature of the plasmatic manifestation is different from that of the physical manifestation. Since we only have the reference to the physical manifestation, the goal was to impart an awareness to say that here you had the cup of life, no GANs, now you have GANs. Now you have created something that, you know, doesn't look anywhere near as to what you were creating in the first place. You know, it's not like a loaf of bread. You know, you bring all the ingredients together and you knead the dough and then you let it rise and you put it in the oven, you bake it. The bread resembles that, what you put into the oven. But in the cup of life, the GANS doesn't resemble anything that you put in the cup. You know, you put salt, you put water, and you get GANS. What? Where did the GANS come from? And so that was the, shall we say, the teaser. But now, in terms of explanation, we still haven't fully explained it in a direct way. And so, you know, from my standpoint, I'm limited because I'm not part of the research team. And so I don't have access to any confidential information. This way, I'm just giving information based on tried and true physics. But the point of the matter is, the Keshe Foundation is using the technology the way it's manifested. So we are not compromising in that regard, because by compromising, we have to drop down to an energy level. And by doing that, we end up going at the slowest rate. We can no longer afford to go at the slowest rate. We have to speed it up. And there is every urgency to speed it up. And the reason for it is because our change is happening within a generation. And so it only takes one generation to effectively create a paradigm shift. And that's what we're doing. The binding energies on this planet are transgenerational. And they're not interested in this paradigm shift. To them, a paradigm shift is fun things to talk about, maybe in the coffee shop, or to run some seminar somewhere where you can charge big bucks and have people come and rub elbows with other people who are supposedly having abundant knowledge and a high IQ. But the fact of the matter is, our society is based on that ancient technology. We are now going through a paradigm shift. And what has happened this week is that the foundation has actually gone beyond. So now it's a matter of, can we keep up? And do we want to keep up? So what we're trying to do as part of this process, part of this platform, and all the other platforms that we're doing in the Keshe Foundation, is to, shall we say, empower the knowledge seekers to overcome that fear, that resistance to that paradigm shift, and become part of the solution. Abandon that gravitational stability, which is really part of the problem, and enjoy the magnetical stability.
So you can hear we throw around these terms quite liberally, cosmic rays, and we think we know what we're talking about. A lot of you take B12 and a lot of you take other things. And I always said B12 is a radiation source, B9 is a radiation source. And very soon we start using these in the wellness centers, but as a magnetic field radiation, as sources of cosmic rays, the same as the B12. But now we don't need a B12 anymore because universe makes these cosmic rays. It's in abundance in it, but we didn't understand it. Cosmic rays are different than cosmic radiation. Two different things. And this knowledge is too soon to be in the hand of the man. They create mayhem. Unless they understand, they become peaceful, then we teach it. So you can see how deep this knowledge is going, and it hasn't even been taught, and it hasn't been fully shared yet. A cosmic ray is not a cosmic ray, and big difference between cosmic radiation and cosmic rays. So a lot of understanding to be had here, and that will come, I think. And it sounds like once they start using these in the wellness system, perhaps the success or the turnaround time will be greatly reduced. Instead of having to go through months of processing or weeks of processing, perhaps you will then just need a few sessions in the system, because they're going to be using this cosmic radiation magnetic field.
One change to what you just said.
Yeah.
We're in the past tense now. These new systems have been turned on 2 weeks ago.
Okay, and that was interesting. He said they had about 100 people in the live workshop, I think it was. So we have 15 here or 16 here, so that's not too bad. Normally when Mr. Kesh used to come into these sessions, all of a sudden the attendance would rise to 50 or 60 people. But they only, it seems he was saying they had 100 people in there live at that point in time in the Knowledge Seekers Workshop. And they were monitoring everything on those graphs of the different souls that were in there.
I suspect that that's the number of people on Zoom.
You're not sure if those included the panelists or the attendees, you know, because we are not the panelists. So was it 100 people?
Yeah, that was
Oh,
including the attendees. There's very few panelists, Ike. We all used to be panelists years past, but because we abused the microphone and weren't careful with the microphone, Mr. Kesh said only, you know, probably Stanley and Rick and a few of the translators, the Italians, the French, the Portuguese, and the rest are actually panelists, as I understand it. So I think that would include everyone. Attendees are the majority of them at this point, because of the fact that he took the microphones away, because people just weren't careful with them and they were interrupting his delivery, his downloading.
Yeah, I wasn't sure. That's why I was asking that, because
Again, I've never been well, I was a panelist years ago, but as of after that, I've never been a panelist again. So I wouldn't know, but I think he did mention 100 that were about 100 were in there. Okay, any other questions more pertinent to the topic here? But these are being gifted for us to use. Again, we don't have to understand how to create that cosmic radiation field. All we have to do is use it. And apparently it's quite amenable to everyone and every condition, whether it's for feeding, Alzheimer's, bone repair, emotional balancing, and the rest. Again, I don't know. There may be different strengths or different amounts needed, but he doesn't seem to want to reveal that yet. He said our soul is not mature enough yet to properly handle this. So it could be something like, in a way, a genie in the bottle, and you wish for the wrong thing and it gets created. That can throw a lot of things off balance without you thinking innocently you're doing something maybe just for yourself or someone else. But that's part of really having a deep, deep understanding of this. And it hasn't even been really taught, he said. But as Alex said, you can try, and that was the directive, is to try and share what you think you understand. No offense there.
Well, I was going to say, Ike has a tremendous challenge because the state of California is enormous. Is rivaling the size of a lot of countries, and there are a lot of free thinkers. Well, California has that reputation of having a lot of free thinkers. When we look at the results coming out of California today, the word that comes to mind is disappointing. But it's a tremendous challenge. We had quite a few people. I think Ike is really the trooper there, and probably going to have to lead the charge. But then I look at all the other states. I think you're alone in your state, Mark, and Irmgard is alone in hers, and
I've got a suspicion that there are many, many more. It's like, the old fable about the slave. The dragon has come into town, and most people, they don't want to go out and battle the dragon. So they stay in their huts or their hovels or their houses or whatever. And the brave ones go out and deal with the dragon. And then once the dragon is slain, then you see everybody else coming out of their houses.
That's how I feel too. Mike, you're right. I feel that way too.
Because this has touched a lot of people in many, many ways, as Mr. Kesh said, in the hundreds of millions of people. But they've heard it. Maybe they've made a Gans or something, but they're just not really sure if this is the right way, the wrong way. But once some of these dragons are slayed and the nations start announcing it, I think more and more people will be so surprised. Gee, I never knew you were right down the street from me. Why didn't you ever come into a meeting or, attend anything? But that either way, it's just fine. No problem. But I think there's many people that have been touched by this knowledge all across the world, but they just don't feel it's safe. Look at all the people in the Netherlands where he used to teach there around Philips. They used to have thousands of people. And if you go into the meeting today, you may see 10 of those people, mostly new people, younger people, and the rest of it. So I think they're just waiting till they feel it's safe, because a lot of times you don't want to be overheard saying what you shouldn't be overheard saying in this day and age, let's say. Canada, it'll apply to all of them, I would say. And then they'll say, oh yeah, I was always there, but I just didn't, I didn't really want to come forward or expose myself out into the public domain and the rest of it. No problem. And perhaps many knowledge seekers that have separated in the past will also find the balance and come back.
Well, you can see how difficult it is. Like, I just uncovered a serious problem in Canada where, we have some websites called the Wellness Center. And I researched who was behind these things, and, it's always the same people, and they play the same game, but they just change their stripes, if you will,
Are they riding the coattails, you mean, of the Keshe Foundation?
Yeah, that's what they do, you know. And you know, they twist it so that they're able to position themselves as some kind of authority figures, and they're appealing to this emotional attraction that, you know, that we all
Yeah.
have, you know. So the emotional attraction is inherent and is natural, but what we've been trying to say with these sessions here is that it is a manifestation from the plasma side. And what these people are doing is literally ignoring that, and they're saying, well, I can't see the plasmatic side, so, you know, we're just going to present the physical dominant side as if it were a worm on a hook, you know, and let's see who we can fish in. And of course, they will succeed. There's no question about that. But the thing is that they themselves continue to be part of the problem, and they actually make it more unbalanced for themselves. And this is the ultimate penalty that they will face, you see.
Oh.
So, you know, at some point in time with these new sessions, they will come into contact with this. That is undoubted. And when they do, they'll fall out of bed. And then they'll see how much damage they created, and they'll want to try and fix that. And I'll tell you, that part is going to be extremely difficult, because one of the things that they've certainly done is create a persona, a mystique, if you will, an aura that makes them as experts. And if they decide to change, then they would be actually contradicting themselves, and it would really cause a lot of confusion. So they don't want to go down that route. But they're not looking at, shall we say, the enhancement of the soul. They're looking at the enhancement of their pocketbook. And for them, that's the bottom line. So when you are, you know, bottom line oriented, you know what that means? That means you're going for the smallest scheme. It's really too bad, you know, to put all your time and effort into the smallest scheme. So,
Right, and that's what we see with this term quantum physics. They didn't want to give Mr. Keshe the credit for it. It's basically the plasma technology in a way, but they wanted a separation so that it would seem like it's different. So they came up with this term quantum physics.
well, because it's not something that could be measured, right? And, you know, get your tape measure out there and see if you can, you know, measure this quantum physics. And they always want to try and measure it, and so when it's unattainable, then that allows them to continue their research. And as you know, veteran researchers will tell you, we're not paid to find a solution, we're just paid to research. That's where, you know, when your bottom line mentality comes into play. So anyway, I want to encourage all the knowledge seekers on this platform to understand their position, and how vital it is, and how important it is. And also the reward has come this week, because what we've been talking about in terms of understanding has already happened. We have absolutely crossed the watershed. We're on the other side. So now what we have to do is well, we have to enjoy it and work it and get used to it and become a more magnetically stable. And I want to thank everybody for allowing me to continue to make these presentations. And I hope I'm contributing well enough for you to be able to see it as the bread, and you put the butter, you put the jam, and you put the topping, and understand that we are all contributing to the benefit of the whole. through the Peace Dome. Thank you so much.
Okay, and I was just looking for that little background. May you be proud of the person you are, the difference you make, and the knowledge you're bringing. I don't think that's the exact quote. May you be proud of the person you are, the difference you make, and the work you do. I think those are the three. So that applies to all of us. And I don't think we should forget that, as it was embossed on a keychain that was given to some of the attendees in Manchester. So thank you all. What I'll do is I'm going to play the Wellness Center again, which we all know is connected to the wellness centers, the UBISOS, and well, at least with the UBISOS, as I understand it, they're connected to a larger system or two larger systems. So it's just not the UBISOS on its own, it's actually connected to a much larger system. So I'm going to play that and then the final disclaimer, and the meeting will come to an end. Was there anyone else who's wishing to share anything else before we close? Thank you, Alex. Thank you, all the knowledge seekers, for being present here and adding your field strength, even if you were there on the silent line of communication, which is perfectly fine. We all think we have to hear something in the matter state, but that's not true at all. We have a couple of new messages. Let's just see. Very interesting. Alenka said, thank you, Alenka, for being present. And Jefferson, thank you, Mark, and Alex, and Ray, and all. A wonderful week for everyone. Yes, I think the world is, and the planet is moving into, again, another turning point in a way. Especially with if they see the scientists collaborating among the Iran and China, and they're moving across borders, perhaps even transmuting into systems back and forth. Would there be any reason that we need borders, as we're all collaborating as one now to unwind this technology? So as Mr. Ketch said, we did need to bring down these borders, and this is the first part of the ending of the borders, where the fish have no borders and the birds have no borders and the rest, the bears and the foxes and so much and so forth. So it's going to happen for humanity as well. And it will need to, as people start changing their map locations, without a doubt. But I think he doesn't want to do it against the wishes of the government. So eventually they will relent, and I think it'll be benefit for everyone. No need to have passports and fees and all the rest of this to keep us, in a way, encaged, so to speak. Oh, you don't have a passport? You can't possibly leave the country. And I don't think a lot of people have passports. Okay, thank you all for being here today.